This morning I want to talk just a little bit. This is going to be a little bit different than our typical Sunday morning sermon. I want to talk a little bit about the voice of a mother. I gave them a couple of pictures, and if you'll put the one picture up with most of my family there, and hopefully this picture is clear enough that you can see, but in that picture are the closest mothers in my life. Of course, my wife is there, the mother of our two boys, and you heard from her just a few moments ago, and I know that today is a challenging day for her, but we honor her for being the mother that she is and the work that she put towards this day and towards this church. Several of my sisters are there, they're mothers. Several of my sisters in that picture are mothers, and my mother is also in that picture. And if everything goes as planned, you all should be meeting my mother here in a few weeks. She is planning on coming up. But that's my mother there in the middle in the black and gold Ethiopian outfit. And I believe this was at my parents' 50th wedding anniversary. And that's her with most of her children. Not all the children are there. We're a big family. And her grandchildren who were born at that time. But my parents had 9 children, and I realized this week that when you come from a family of that size, you have very little chance of finding a picture of just you and your mom. You got 9 siblings. Good luck trying to find where she took out pictures for each of you. But there is a second picture I want them to put up from many, many, many years ago, and that's me there in my mother's lap. And the picture looks about like pictures from back then looked, and you can see that nobody's ever accused me of missing a meal ever since I was a baby. In fact, my mom is the smallest person in our family. She's about 5'2" or 5'3", and people often, when they see her surrounded by all of us kids, sometimes it's hard to even see her, that you can't see her around us, and some of them are shocked that she's our mother. But she's a unique lady with a fairly unique story. As I mentioned before, she was born in Ethiopia and born where they had animals and farm work that she would have to do before going to school. And she met my father while he was stationed in Ethiopia, and she took a bold step, leaped out, got married, moved all the way across the world, left her family, and began the legacy that would shape the rest of her life and shape the lives of her children and her grandchildren. She doesn't say a whole lot, but she does not waste words. When she speaks with wisdom and clarity, and sometimes a little bit too much clarity. My mom is brutally honest. That's one of the funniest things that I have to tell you some stories someday, but just no filter. You just have to get her out of the room, get her out of the situation if you don't want her to say what she's thinking. I have many stories that I could tell you from my life and my relationship with my mom, but one of the best stories comes from a time from before I can remember, when I was just a baby. And in fact, I called my mom yesterday to have her refresh my memory about this story. I wanted to make sure I was telling the story properly, but I was born in Liberia while my parents were stationed there in the U.S. Army. They were stationed in Liberia, and I was born there in Liberia, and I was no more than just a few months old when my mother was in the kitchen at our house, and she says that I was laying down in a room down the hallway, and she was in the kitchen doing things, and she says she doesn't always claim to hear the voice of God. She's not one of those people where every time, the wind blows, she says God told her something, but she said at that moment she felt impressed that something was wrong and she needed to check on me. And she says she still to this day don't know why she did what she did, but she ran out of that kitchen with urgency and ran as fast as she could to the room where I was, and she leaned over to check on me, and the moment she leaned over, there was a heavy ebony wood. If you know anything about ebony wood, just one of the most dense heavy woods. There was a sculpture of some sort that was on a shelf or something, and still don't know why it happened, how it happened, but the moment she bent over, that sculpture fell down, hit her in the back, and would have likely hit me in the head if she had not been there. And at that time, that would have been multiple times my body weight. There's no telling if I would have survived it. There's no telling what the damage would have been if she had not been there. But I tell this story because her immediate reaction to that and the sentiment that she always tells that story with is to thank God that she was there to take the hit and to protect me. Every time she tells that story, it is to thank God that she was there to take the blow. Thank God that she was there to take the pain and she was able to protect me. And she never gave a second thought to the pain that it inflicted on her. Her immediate reaction and her ongoing reaction is a reaction of thanks. God, I thank you that you directed me. I don't know what device that was that made that happen, but I'm thankful that you directed me. And let me tell you that that is a microcosm of who she is as a mother. And I believe that reflects many of the mothers here in this room, that there is a willingness to sacrifice. There is a willingness to take the blows. There is a willingness to say that I will endure the pain and the discomfort if it means that you don't have to endure that pain and that discomfort. But I want to talk today about a mother's voice. And as I said, if all goes as planned, you'll get to see her here shortly. And her accent is noticeable when she talks. She has a pretty strong accent. English is her second language. And perhaps maybe that accent makes her voice a bit more unique and a bit more recognizable. But I think that most of us here would recognize our mother's voice in just a few syllables. It kind of reminds me, I was talking to a missionary to Israel, and he would talk about how when you go to the villages there and the shepherds, when they would come to these towns, these villages, there was a communal pen that they would put all their sheep in, all the different sheep, different flock. They would all be mixed in together. But he says that when the shepherd was ready to leave town after conducting his business, he would come to the gate of that pen and he would just make a sound with his voice. And you would see only his sheep would perk up, hear his voice, and come running. And he would leave without fail. Only his sheep would respond to his voice. I believe that's how it is many times. There's just something recognizable about that voice. And now that I'm a father and I watch my wife be a mother to our boys, I recognize that you can't always tell when they're listening to that voice. Sometimes it feels like you're talking to a brick wall, but trust me, they are hearing that voice. Sometimes the boys will say or do something and they'll react in a certain way, and I can see the hand, I can see the voice of my wife in them. For my wife, as she mentioned, like it is for many of us, the voice of a mother is now a memory. And this might not be an easy time of year for us, but I do believe that it is still important to reflect on that voice, that memory, and to appreciate the uniqueness of that voice. Words produce, words create, and I believe that you can still look in the mirror and see what some of her words produce. Even if it is a memory, there is cause here today to celebrate that voice and appreciate the things that were spoken into your life and the things that were spoken over your life. Perhaps some of us here did not have a healthy relationship with our biological mother, but this is also a great time of year to acknowledge those who have become spiritual mothers in our lives. This is a day worth celebrating. Now, I do sometimes see women who look like my mom, who remind me of my mom. I tell Sister Prasad all the time that she looks like my mom. Every time I see her, she reminds me of my mom. I see that a lot, but I don't believe I've ever said in my life that somebody sounds like my mom. I was thinking about that this week. I just don't think I've ever heard any other woman's voice and said that she sounds like my mom. Let me share something with you here. The year 1865 was an eventful year, and I guess pretty much every year is an eventful year. But in the U.S., the U.S. was nearing the end of the Civil War, and it would prove 1865 would be the year where the U.S. President Abraham Lincoln would be assassinated, and the U.S. had not quite yet emerged as a world power. And at that time, countries like France and Prussia and Germany and Great Britain and Russia, they were jockeying for global control or global influence. And in this time where there really was not any one global power, a poet by the name of William Ross Wallace wrote a poem that he calls What Rules the World. Now, at that time, many people would have probably had differing opinions as to what was going to rule the world. World powers were jockeying for position. And perhaps somebody would have said when they saw the name of that poem that industrial power or influence might rule the world, or military might and military deterrence might rule the world, or having strategic allies might rule the world, or financial domination, financial reach might rule the world. But William Wallace's poem reached what might be a surprising conclusion, but it's a conclusion that's been repeated many times in the decades since he wrote that poem. In fact, the very first words, the very first lines in What Rules the World gives insight into what his conclusion is. And let me just read that poem, What Rules the World. Blessings on the hand of women, angels guard its strength and grace. In the palace, cottage, hovel, oh, no matter where the place, with that never storms assailed it, rainbows ever gently curled, for the hand that rocks the cradle is the hand that rules the world. Infancy's the tender fountain, power made with beauty flow, mothers first to guide the streamlets, from them souls unresting grow. Grow on for the good or evil, sunshine streamed or evil hurled, for the hand that rocks the cradle is the hand that rules the world. Women, how divine your mission, here upon our natal sod. Keep, oh keep the young heart open, always to the breath of God. All true trophies of the ages are from mother's love impearled, for the hand that rocks the cradle is the hand that rules the world. Blessings on the hand of women, father, son, and daughter's cry, and the sacred song is mingled with the worship in the sky. Mingles where no tempest darkens, rainbows evermore are hurled, for the hand that rocks the cradle is the hand that rules the world. In this poem, he concludes that motherhood is the preeminent force for change and direction in the world. It's the hand and that voice that shapes society. The nurturing strength of a mother's role is powerful and highly influential in the development of children, and by extension, that is influential in the development of future generations and future leaders. The second stanza of that poem, I know that's old English and it's kind of hard to follow sometimes, but the second stanza of that poem, it invokes a powerful imagery. It paints the picture of a gentle hand that's guiding a stream that's still a small stream. He calls it a streamlet. And he's saying there's a gentle hand that guides that stream, but that stream will ultimately grow and become stronger in power and influence, but its direction, its trajectory was established while it was still just a little streamlet. When there was just a gentle hand guiding that stream in the beginning stages, that goes a long way to establishing what that child is going to be. It goes a long way to establishing what the moral compass of that child was going to be. He also, in that stanza, he suggested that that river can be influenced to grow in either direction. That hand can lead it towards evil, or that hand can lead it towards good. In that third stanza, Wallace references the divine and spiritual nature of a mother's mission, and he acknowledges that they are vessels that God uses to give his love and to give his guidance to children. And he encourages fathers, sons, and daughters to speak blessings over the mothers. And that's what we've come to do here today. We've come to speak blessings over you. And he suggests that when we do that, that heaven joins in the blessings that we speak over them, that we are thankful for the guiding hands and the guiding voices that are shaping us and molding us, even when you don't realize that you are shaping and molding. It's not glamorous, and it might not be the first duty that comes to mind when people talk about what is the most important, but the person who rocks the cradle will have the greatest impact on the moral and spiritual development of our children. This concept is not far removed from what we find in Proverbs 22:6, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. I want to just take a quick moment here. Like I said, I know this is a bit different, but I want to take a quick moment to look at the influence of a couple of mothers in the Bible. And the interesting thing is that both of these mothers I want to look at quickly, they both consider themselves religious, but they were putting very different things into their children. Judges chapter 17 tells the story of a man named Micah, and it talks a bit about his mother, and it's an interesting chapter if you have time to read it. And historians actually believe that Micah's mother was Delilah, Samson's wife. There's some historical reasons to perhaps think that. But either way, Micah's relationship with his mother was far from ideal, because the story opens up when we're introduced to them. Micah has stolen 1,100 shekels of silver from his mother. That's how the story begins. It's about 4 months worth of working. Can you imagine that? The wages you get in 4 months. He has stolen that from his mom. Now, his mom claimed to worship Jehovah God, but we see that in several places that she tended to dabble. She tended to mix her worship with God with some of the pagan worship of the day. And so in keeping with the pagan practice of that day, when she saw that her money was missing, she put a curse on whoever stole her money. Put a pagan curse on whoever stole her money. And I've probably been tempted to do that at some point in life, but that's not something we can do. But this was enough to scare Micah and to make Micah return the money. He saw his mother put the curse, and it scared him, and it made him return it. Then when he returned it, she prayed for Jehovah God to bless Micah. The story gets convoluted, because then she promised that she was going to take all of that silver and make an idol for Jehovah God that Micah could use to worship God. Just put so much confusion in him. And this is bad enough, but to make it worse, she told God she was going to give him the 1,100 shekels of silver, but she only used 200 shekels, and she kept 900 shekels for herself hidden away. She put this idol in Micah's house and told Micah to use this idol to worship Jehovah God. And you would see, looking down the road in Micah's life, that he would continue to live his life in this direction that his mother set him off in. Micah would build a shrine in his own house, and then he would make an ephod, and he would install one of his sons as the priest. And he has no authority to do any of this. The ephod is a priestly robe that was supposed to only be worn by the high priest of Israel, and only a Levite was meant to become a priest. But Micah is violating so many of the words of God. And then he went on to find an actual Levite that he could get to come and live with him, and he had him perform priestly duties. And this Levite was out of bounds. He knew that he should not be doing what Micah was asking him to do, but Micah was offering him money. So this Levite decided, if you pay me, I'll be your personal priest in your personal religion. And the interesting thing is, after Micah set all of this up, he says, now I know for sure that Jehovah is going to be good to me because I have a Levite as my priest. It's almost as if he felt like now he had maneuvered and manipulated God to a place where God was going to have to co-sign what he was doing. How delusional can you get with your walk with God? But hear me, this mixing of gods and this perverting of religion was something that was natural to him, because he was living with the voice of his mother. He learned what he learned from his mother, and then he lived what he learned from his mother. The tragedy is, you read on into the next chapter, you find that Micah's idolatry did not just affect him and his family, but he was influential in his tribe. And before it was all said and done, it would spill over into his entire tribe, and they would embrace idolatry for the next 500 years. But let me highlight a second mother who was also religious. In 1 Samuel chapter 1, we read of a young lady by the name of Hannah. And Hannah was one of Elkanah's 2 wives. And the Bible says that he did love Hannah, and he gave Hannah the best of things that he could give her. But the other wife would taunt her because she had children and Hannah did not have any children. And Hannah was heartbroken, but she was still faithful to God. She was still faithful to the house of God. She would cry out to God, and finally, through tears and in desperation, she would make a vow to God that if he gave her a child, she would give him back to God. And Hannah would ultimately give birth to a child who she would call Samuel, and the name Samuel means God has heard. And she said, I called him this because God listened to my cry. I was heartbroken, but God would respond. And she called him Samuel. Every time she would call his name, it was just a reminder that Jehovah heard me in my distress. But when Hannah said God has heard, it seems like she really, really meant it, because she knew that God had heard her vows and she would prove to be a woman of her word. Unlike Micah's mother, there was no hypocrisy in Hannah. There was no manipulation in Hannah. She did what she said she was going to do. When Samuel was born, she brought him to the house of God, and he was raised in the house of God. And ultimately, he would be called by God from a very early age. And Samuel would prove to be just as responsive to God as his mother was. Samuel would prove to be just as reliable as his mother was. Samson would prove to be just as faithful and just as consistent as his mother was. The voice of his mother was so strong in his life that even when the priest that Samuel was serving in the house of God, when that priest was out of the will of God, when that priest was saying and doing the wrong things, Samuel was not swayed by the priest, because the voice of his mother was so powerful in his life. He had seen her cry out to God, and he knew that she was a lady who kept her word to God. He knew that Hannah did not mix her walk with God with the things of the world. She was consistent, she was faithful, and she produced a consistent and faithful man. She produced a man that says, even when the high priest is out of line, there is something in me. There was a voice that I still hear. There's an echo of a voice that I still hear. I know the way I need to go. So Samuel would become a voice that would impact the entire nation of Israel. What was placed in him by his mother would flow through him, and he would impact the entire nation. Both of these mothers had access to the Word of God. Both of these mothers claimed to have a relationship with Jehovah God. One mother, with her voice and her actions, she put things in her son that made him unstable. She put things in her son that made him confused in his walk with God. But Hannah put something in Samuel that made him unable to be confused, no matter what was even happening in the church. She put something in Samuel that made him strong and made him consistent. And her voice would echo through Samuel, and he would become a voice to the entire nation. I believe this morning that is the power of a mother's voice. That even when you don't realize there's an impact, when you don't realize it's being absorbed, there is power in your consistent voice. There is unique power. Don't get discouraged. Don't feel defeated. It's not always easy, but it's always worth it to be the voice of God in the lives and the minds and the spirits of your children. Amen. And so we've come here today to celebrate. I said I wasn't going to be long today. Still trying to find that balance between celebrating and knowing that people have reservations and plans and all kinds of things. But I do think it is important that we take this moment here to acknowledge the importance, acknowledge the efforts that sometimes go unacknowledged. You're doing the work of God in the lives of your children. And those whose mothers are not here, you're a reflection of some of the things that she placed in you. I'm going to ask the singers and musicians to come. Before we leave here today, as I said before, we were implored to speak blessings over the mothers. And I want to do that here today. I want to speak blessings over the mothers. I want to speak blessings over your families. I want to speak healing and strength to those who are mourning today. I want this to be a day of reflection for those who need to reflect. But I want this to be a day where we leave with a great appreciation for the voice of mothers whether they be biological or spiritual. We've got some great spiritual mothers in this house. We've got some women here in this house where it would do you some good to listen to them, to connect with them, to learn from their consistency, to learn from their voice. Let's stand all over this building. I wonder if it's possible, if you're here with your children, if you're here with your mother, I wonder if you can just connect with I know some of you have children who are out there, but if you're here with your children, I wonder if you can just connect with your mother, connect with spiritual mothers. But I want you also to take a moment to reflect on the mothers in your life, their voice. Let's show appreciation today. It's often a thankless job. It's often an underappreciated job. But let's show some appreciation. All right, now let's bow our heads. I want to just pray right now. God, we speak blessings over every family. We speak blessings over every mother. We speak blessings over every household, God. Strengthen right now weary hands. Strengthen weary minds. Strengthen weary hearts. God, baptize somebody in this house with the fresh confidence that their voice matters. God, there are mothers here who are standing in the gap for children. There are mothers here who are standing in the gap for grandchildren. There are spiritual mothers who are standing in the gap. God, let there be a lifting right now in this house, a lifting of the Holy Ghost. Let there be strength. Let there be peace. Let there be healing. Come on, just take a few moments right now. Take a few moments. Take a few moments right now. I know it's Mother's Day, but there's strength in this house. I know it's Mother's Day, but there's strength right now.